Hey gang, it's your buddy Platt, back with another episode of Value Spirits. Today I got a little treat, something a little newer on the marketplace. We have Jim Beam Black 7-year. I purchased this bottle at $20.99. You should be able to find this low 20s, pretty much most markets, just in the research I've done. For a bourbon aged 7 years, or any non kind of Scotch spirit, whether it's Canadian whiskey, what have you, aged 7 years and coming in at that price point, that right there kind of signifies a lot of value. So I'm really hopeful on this bottle for sure. Real quick, let's see what we got. Jim Beam Black, aged 7 years. Hard to tell on the camera, but there's a little texture on here, and you can see the black. Think the Metallica Black album kind of thing. Tells me we're at 90 proof, 45% alcohol by volume. 7 generations, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey since 1795. After 7 years resting in barrels, something special happens. Well, I hope so there. Real quick, a little background on Jim Beam. Jim Beam is based in Claremont, Kentucky. They are part of Beam Suntory. They merged with Suntory, the Japanese whiskey giant, back in 2014. So now they're a worldwide whiskey giant. But the story really starts in 1795 when the distillery is founded by Jacob Beam. Him and his family had immigrated from Germany. I believe their name was Bohm, B-O-H-M, and then got anglicized to Beam. He sold a variety of corn whiskey that would be later known as bourbon. At the time, they weren't really using that term. There is a Bourbon County in Kentucky and what have you, but they weren't really using that term. At the time, there was no regulations, no rules, so they weren't calling it bourbon. Actually, what they were calling it was Old Jacob Beam's Sour Mash. That's how it was referred to. But back then, you didn't even bottle. There was no labels with this on. You would literally go to the distillery, bring your own jug, similar to bringing a growler now to a brewery. You did that for your whiskey back then. Move ahead 85 years to 1880. And the times they were changing, we had railroads, we had telegraph wires. So it was time to start bottling, and that's what they did, bottling and then selling nationally. The decision at the time was we need a kind of a new name and, something official. They named it Old Tub. That's what Beam was known as for years. They actually reintroduced Old Tub back in 2020, and if you keep an eye out in your whiskey section, I have seen some bottles floating around with that. Move ahead to 1943, and another generation of Beam was starting to make changes. James Beauregard Beam. He decided to change the name from Old Tub to Jim Beam. He named it after himself, but he also put on the label, "None genuine without my signature," and that is still on the bottles today. You find it on this particular bottle on the side label. You'll see that on every bottle of Jim Beam. So James Beauregard Beam will not be forgotten. Move ahead to the late 80s and early 90s. And even though Jim Beam has always been one of the largest bourbons, selling wise in the U.S., the bourbon category itself was really having kind of a hard time. America had kind of switched over to vodka at that time, and even the whiskey drinkers were starting to drink Crown Royal, or they really gotten into the premium and super premium scotches at the time. Well, another generation of Beam decided it was time to fight back, and that was Booker No. And Booker came out with a series called their Small Batch Collection, and it was really the first line of super premium bourbons to hit the market. And the first one he came out with was Booker's, named after himself, of course, and it was the first barrel strength bourbon out on the market. At that time, and I remember it because I was just getting, in college, starting to bartend, and everything was 80 proof. Besides Turkey 101, if you worked at a place that had a bottle of Turkey 101, everything else was 80 proof. So releasing a bourbon in the mid 120s was just insane. They also released Baker's Knob Creek, which was a 9-year-old bourbon, which again at that time just seemed insane because most things at your local bar was straight bourbon. 2-year-old bourbon, some 4-year-olds, but no one was doing 9-year. And then lastly, Basil Hayden, which was utilizing the old Granddad High Rye Mash Bill. And actually the gentleman's picture that's on the bottle of Old Granddad is Basil Hayden. That's who that is. Real quick, let's get into some of Jim Beam's other products. There used to be a Jim Beam Black at one time. It was bottled at 86 proof. Also, the one I remember did not have an age statement. It was in this range, the 6 to 8 year. I think at one time they might have labeled it at a 6 year, but that was years back. Next is Devil's Cut, comes out in 90 proof. This is an interesting product. When you age a whiskey, the barrel will breathe and you'll lose some of that whiskey. It'll evaporate. That's known as angel share. What Beam did in this particular product is they took the water that they would use to cut down whiskey to get it to bottling proof. They would then rinse the used barrels that just got dumped and try to extract some of that whiskey that might be left in the woods, thus the Devil's Cut. They also have a single barrel version of Jim Beam. No age statement on that one, but it's bottled at 108 proof. Jim Beam also has a full line of flavored whiskeys and canned cocktails. Enough about that. Let's drink this whiskey. All right. I'm excited about this one. Oh, I smell that from here. Let's jump on in. It's warm on the nose, but not hot. 90 proof, that sounds about right. I do get some heft. I do get a little wood. I get some of that leather that you sometimes can pick out of Jim Beam products. This smells viscous. I don't know how that happens, but I get a little vanilla in there too. This just smells, compared to, I've had Beam a couple months back, and it just smells like it's more complex. There's just a little more there. If you've seen some of my other value series spirits, they're a little simple. They may give you some barrel notes. They may give you a little vanilla. That's it. This already smells a little more complex, so I'm eager to dive on in. A little more oomph. Oh, all right. Now that's all right. It took a second, but then that barrel came in, and it has some staying. It stays with you a little bit. I've got to go back in now. That is bourbon. That just seems like a bourbon that has a little extra just weight, mass, viscosity, plenty of sweetness on that classic corn. You still kind of get the classic corn notes toward the front. You do get a little rye spice, plenty of that barrel vanilla, but it's not astringent. It's not an over-the-top aging that you can sometimes get with products that's over-aged. I think 7 years is a really nice spot for bourbons. If for whatever reason you had a friend with too much money and you've gotten into some of the pappy stuff that gets into 15 Arbor or some of the older Michters or stuff, it gets to be too much at that age. But 7 years, you've really gone deep in that barrel and pulled out some of those barrel notes, and it's just more mature though. You've allowed that bourbon to breathe in and out enough and have, even though, you know, technically there's no, you're not doing anything to it, it's still changing. That whiskey changes over time, and this just, it's just really more mature Jim Beam, which I think if you drink the younger Jim Beam now, you know, the regular Jim Beam, you're like, nice for the price, but you kind of want it more, and this is a little bit more. Man, for this price, I'm really liking it. I'm not saying this is the greatest bourbon all the time. Don't get me twisted there, but man, for this price, and hopefully if it's out in a place that you drink, they're not trying to gouge you anyway on this. This is a pretty good deal. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or spirits you'd like me to try, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.